This is Bryan Hitch, and you are listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
Well, greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 186 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. My name's Rick Verbonis, and I am your host of this show. And as always, I am joined by the best gosh darn co-host out there. That is Bob Lucius. Oh, Bob, the British are coming. The British are coming.
I certainly hope so, Rick. I think I got this one. I think I have this one.
All right, you figured this one out? What is
I think so. Is it because our guest is coming to us live from London?
That would be like the easy low-hanging fruit answer, Bob. I mean, that's so obvious, but no, our guest, who is British and he is coming to us from London, has a new book out called The Redcoat, and it starts off in 1775, and it does have a guy running on a horse with a lantern telling people, but he's saying the Redcoats are coming. The Redcoats are coming. So, but who said the British are coming? Do you know?
Was it Paul Revere?
It was Paul Revere.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
All right.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to go with London Calling, the album from the Clash.
Yeah, that is.
I thought you were going to go there, but
you know what? Maybe you should have given me a suggestion.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Right.
When's the next time we're going to have someone from London calling us?
Who knows?
Well, you know what? If Mike Perkins comes back on the show, he's been on the show a couple times while he's been in America. Then he's moved back over to England. I'm not sure exactly where. So maybe next time he calls in, maybe we'll have London calling. And and we've had who else? We've had Paul Jenkins on the show. He's a British writer. So certainly not the first time we've had a British creator on the show. But we're very much looking forward to talking with the esteemed Bryan Hitch. Now, hard to believe this, Bob. Bryan Hitch and I roughly the same age, born in the same year. He has been in the comic book business for over 30 years. He started at age 17. I can't imagine doing anything that I did at 17 and still doing it today. That's
crazy.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is amazing, Rick. I come from a military background, and in the military, you move every 2 to 3 years. You get a different job. It might be in the same. It's generally in the same field for the first, 6-7 years of your career, and then you sort of expand. And I find it's really hard in my adult life to have a job for more than 3 or 4 years before I start feeling bored. But it boggles my mind to be in the industry, the comics industry, for 30 years, and to always find something new to wet your whistle. That's amazing.
Well, I think he's found it, and we'll talk more to him about it today because he and several other creators have launched a new, I don't want to say a comic book publisher because they're going to be doing more than that, multimedia. So we'll get to talk to him about that today. And I'm sure he's, that's what's keeping him interested and very excited.
Yeah.
So Bob, also, I want to say to you, happy May Day.
For a second, I thought you were in trouble, but I'm guessing you mean May Day in another context. I'm not familiar. What's this whole May Day?
I guess being military background, you hear May Day.
Right.
That means something else. No, today, if you're listening when this episode comes out, it's May 1st, and May Day it's a European holiday. It's a festival, and they tend to do it. It goes back real the origin of this go back, centuries and centuries ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it's basically the marking the beginning of the summer, right?
Okay.
So it's sometime in between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. So it's, somewhere in that area. And they tend to have a lot of festivities. And so that's what today is,
All right.
May Day.
Happy May Day to you as well. Rick, it makes me think, you're talking about these traditional festivals. You ever see the Hunger Games?
Oh, yeah, of course.
The
Yeah,
movie,
yeah.
right?
I had my son was a teenager at the time, so
Okay.
yeah, that was
Yeah.
huge.
All right. Well, I had seen the first movie, and then of course there's a second movie, and then the third movie is in 2 parts. So it's a lot to watch. And my son started watching it,
Now
and
he's
he's 14.
14 now. Yeah, yeah.
14 going on 30. And so he's binge watching it. But he's got a very busy schedule, Rick. So he watches it in blocks. So like 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there. Like he'll catch some before school in the morning, and then at night, before bed, he'll watch like 20, 15, 20 minutes. And so I'll try to like sit down with him and watch it, because I've never seen, like, I don't know how it ends. So, but he's a devil, right? So I'll sit down and watch it, and he'll intentionally like pause it to like go to the bathroom and then like take 15 minutes to come back, or like he'll be like, oh, gotta go to school, and then he'll like shut the TV off, or like at night, he'll shut it off, going upstairs, gotta take a shower. And I'm like, dude, I want to watch this movie. So so we're down to the last part 2 of the last movie. And right before dinner, we're watching it, got like 15 minutes in. My wife comes home, I cooked dinner. So we eat dinner. Right after dinner, he gets up and announces that he's got to go work out. And so I wait till he leaves, and then I watch the last 19 minutes of part 2 of Mockingjay. And I didn't even rewind it. So he's got to come home tonight thinking he's going to finish up the movie, and he's going to forget where he was, and he's going to be super upset. And I hope 20 years from now, when he's listening to this podcast on, a master, whatever, CD, DVD, whatever they have then of all of this collection, and he gets to this episode, I'm going to say, ha, 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 I gotcha. It was intentional.
All right. Well, Bobby, 20 years from now, you can always get him back and put him in a home. So,
that's good point.
Right.
Yeah.
Bob, and I gotta tell you, that is no fun. Like watching bits and pieces of movies. Like, I can't imagine intentionally doing it like your son, but to be forced into that, like you catch a little here, catch a little there.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of back when I was going to this other gym. They would just put in a movie. And then you'd get on the elliptical and you'd go on different channels, and then like, here's, you can watch live TV or you can watch the movie.
Yeah.
And it's like, they had like the same 6 movies that they just kind of rotated. And I would like, I'd be on the elliptical and I'm like catching 20 minutes here, 25 minutes there, whatever. I think that's how I watched the movie We Are the Millers.
Okay, yeah.
I think
like Jennifer Aniston in it or something.
Yeah. And Ed, whatever his name is.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. I think that's how I watched that movie, and I don't think I watched it all in the same order.
Yeah. That's dangerous. If they put in a movie, like if they were playing like Captain America: The First Avenger, I'd be on that elliptical for like 2 hours, right? And it would kill me. I'd have a heart attack and die of dehydration, right? Have a stroke or something, because I wouldn't be able to like stop watching the movie. So
right. All right. So Bob, we're done on the Facebook group with the Cap Madness, right? That's over with. We don't know what happened because we're recording this a couple weeks ahead of time.
Right.
So I'm on pins and needles trying to figure out, I mean, listen, I'm rooting for Mike Zeck to go all the way. Probably isn't going to happen. He's probably going to lose to Jack Kirby like he did, a few years ago, but who knows? We'll see. But we got to start planning something else to look forward to, right? We got a 200th episode coming up in a few months. We got to do something fun for that.
Yeah. Huh. I wonder if our listeners would have any suggestions.
Well, they already did. Remember, and it's on our bucket list. Maybe it's something to do with that theater. Like, right? We get a whole bunch of listeners call in and play different parts.
Get a bunch of thespians. Yeah.
I
like
it. That'd be fun, right?
That would be fun. Yeah. Although you didn't like my newscaster voice, so I'm a little bit gun shy now.
Well, yes, because it was the same voice of everything.
Don't make me a newscaster the next one.
It might be,
or do I don't know, one or the other.
That might be your thing.
That might be my the thing.
Yeah. All right, and just real quick, some birthdays coming up. So this week we got Bill Sienkiewicz has a birthday, May 3rd. It's funny. I spent a good portion of my life calling him Bill Sienkiewicz.
Yeah,
and
that's what I would have called him. Yeah.
Yeah, then somebody said, no, it's Sienkiewicz. So
Yeah.
anyway, and you might be wondering, what Bill Sienkiewicz have to do with Captain America? Not a whole lot. He
got a great cover.
Yes.
Yeah.
What was it? What was it?
Or what if? Yeah.
Number?
I can't recall.
44.
44.
Number 44. Yeah, it was a great cover of him standing there, and then he's like defrosting, right?
Yeah.
And has like the decades, right? 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, today.
Yeah.
Today.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what else he did? When back in 1990, when they were doing the collection for Adventures of Captain America, by Kevin Maguire, and a few other collections, he did a Captain America, and they made a poster of it. And I have this beat up poster, right, of right here. And this.
Yeah, I think I have one of those someplace.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Sienkiewicz. But look at that. Look at this, Bob.
Oh, look at that. Yeah.
Signed. That's
nice.
Yeah, somebody sent that to me. Ken Fries sent that to me, and was really appreciative. Really cool. One of these days when I get more wall space, I'm going to get a frame to put up.
Nice.
So happy birthday to Bill Sienkiewicz. Also, the next day, May 4th, is Jackson Lansing is celebrating a birthday. Now Jackson, with his co-writer Colin Kelly, wrote Captain America for a few years and then followed that up with the Thunderbolts. And he's been on the show 3 times with Colin. So you want to check those out. He's been on episode 91, talking about the beginning of Sentinel Liberty, 121, talking about the middle of Sentinel Liberty, and then episode 169, talking about the end of Sentinel Liberty, and then also about Thunderbolts. Yeah. So Jackson Landing, happy birthday to you. And then another one, friend of the show, John Beatty. John Beatty celebrates May 6th.
All right, another friend of the show. Happy birthday to all of you.
Yeah, and John, if you want to check it out, he came on episode 43 and had some great stories about his time working with Mike Zack and fascinating stuff. So fun time to listen. Speaking of fascinating creators and fun time to listen, shall we get to our guest today?
Indeed. I mean, he's waiting for us all the way on the other side of the lake. So definitely we should get him in.
Interrompemos esse podcast para perguntar: quem você quer ser?
Designer, engenheira, pedagoga,
administrador.
Quer saber? O Senac EAD é nota máxima no MEC. Tem cursos de diversas áreas, com conteúdo elaborado por especialistas do mercado e professores mestres e doutores. Ainda tem o Senac Carreiras, conectando estudantes a vagas de emprego em todo o país. Saiba mais em ead.senac.br/graduação.
Uma pausa no seu podcast para falar sobre a beleza, essa força poderosa que nos move. No Grupo L'Oréal, nós criamos a beleza com sustentabilidade. Utilizamos em nossas embalagens 85% de plástico PET de origem reciclada. 65% dos ingredientes vieram de base biológica ou derivados de minerais abundantes. Grupo L'Oréal, nós criamos a beleza que move o mundo.
Our guest today has been a leading creative force in American comic books for over 30 years, having worked on characters such as G.I. Joe, Transformers, Superman, and the X-Men for 12 years. He also co-created The Authority with Warren Ellis. After working on DC Comics' then best-selling Justice League comics, he and Mark Millar together created the groundbreaking Marvel series, The Ultimates, giving us a very different version of Captain America. Cap fans may also know his work on the Ed Brubaker miniseries, Captain America Reborn, which brought Steve Rogers back from the dead. Currently, he's the founding member of Ghost Machine, a first-of-its-kind creator-owned and operated media company, along with many other established creators. He's recently launched Redcoat through Ghost Machine, along with writer and co-creator Jeff Johns. We are very excited to have Bryan Hitch join us today. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Now, you reside in the south of London. Are you joining us from your studio there?
Yes, I am, and you can see it's actually quite a nice day outside. It's it's a nice rural area with just a very short hop into London by car or train. So it's the best of all worlds, really.
And so that studio that you have there, right? That's where all the magic happens. So is that like are you pretty much in that room how many hours a day? I dare ask.
Usually I get into here about when the kids have gone to school about 8:30. And if all goes well, I'm out of here by about 5:30 or 6 o'clock. So it's fairly regular. Sometimes if things overrun or there's a few extra things you have to do, then some hours at weekends, but I try not to work weekends. And although I don't always succeed, I try never to work after dinner either. So ideally, I'd like to get up about 5 and get in here about 5:30, and be done much earlier in the day. Especially now the nights are the days are getting longer, and it's just nicer to get some daylight when the weather improves.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And so we obviously want to discuss your new series, Redcoat, as well as discuss your time with Captain America. But before we do, perhaps you could take the listeners through how you got into comics in the first place. Because you and I actually were born in the same year, but I can't imagine having a career like yours dating back to when we were 17.
I've been reading DC comics because that's all we could get. I mean, they were just in this newsagents, which was coincidentally next door to the cinema where I would see things like Superman the movie, and I'd go in and buy the comics afterwards rather than spending my money on the sweets or the drinks in the cinema. And this was in the days in the 1970s when if a film was successful, it could be there for 3 months or 4 months. It wasn't the short kind of play. We haven't seen films run that long since the first Avengers movie, I think. Until then, that movie was in cinemas, 2-3 months, wasn't it? So the whole thing about cinema and comics always was hand in hand for me, even though I kind of discovered Superman and Batman a little earlier. It was that was about the time, about 8 years old, when it just became honestly an obsession. I discovered I could draw and enjoyed drawing. And those things just fired my imaginations, and I could recognize any individual artist just by looking at a single panel of their drawings, And there were the guys I like DC, Garcia Lopez, Don Newton, Jerry Ordway was later. He came sort of in the the earlier 80s, wasn't it? It was with the All-Star Squadron. That was about 82, wasn't it? Kurt Swan's Superman is the one influence I suppose nobody really recognizes in my work, but it's there, it's foundational because they were the first comics that really started to fire my imagination. So I just copied from those things, and I was about 10 years old when I just determined that's what I wanted to do for a living. I wanted to do those because that's all I ever did. I would just draw all the time or create my own stories. So we finished what you guys would call high school, age 16, and I had to be 17 in order to go to the local art college. So there was a bit of time. I had to wait about 6 months before I'd be able to attend that. And I sent samples away to Marvel's UK office in London, where Richard Starkings and Simon Furman were both editors on this line of weekly comics, which Transformers, Action Force, which is essentially G.I. Joe's European characters. So they're all British-based stories, Thundercats and stuff like that. And they pretty much hired me on the spot. So it was just before my 17th birthday. Richard called and said, I've got this 2-part Action Force story. Would you like to do it? So I did that. And I don't think it was very good, but they kept seeing something in it and kept giving me work. So I've been full-time ever since.
Wow. I mean, to imagine doing that at age 17, and then kicking off, and like you said, you've been something you wanted to do since you were 10 years old. So this was like a dream become true for you. And so I'm assuming art school all of a sudden got put on the back burner.
Yeah, that's true. It did. And it was many years into my career before I started thinking about things like, maybe I really should study anatomy and perspective and composition things. And this was pre-internet, so I for me anyways, pre-internet. So I just kept buying books on things like that and absorbing what I could. And that's when I think I really started to improve. And that wasn't long before I started doing the Authority. So just prior to that Stormwatch, those Stormwatch issues I did with Warren, that was kind of when I think I really had my education, even though I'd been in the industry for about 11 years by that point.
I can't even remember when I was 17, Bryan. So it just seems like so long ago. So, but I do remember when I started reading comics, and particularly Captain America comics. So that was really maybe like the late 70s, early 80s. I really got into Captain America. And so I tend to be really nostalgic about the art and the artists and the stories of that period. But, if I'm honest, the art that really resonates with me is maybe the more realistic, sometimes the more gritty art of really the mid 2000s, the Eptings and Butch Geist, Mike Perkins, Luke Ross, yourself, right? Really, very almost photorealistic in some panels where it's just
Right.
so much to see. And so thinking back over the different periods of art, and maybe even the different periods of Captain America art, going back to the 40s, are there certain periods that you're particularly nostalgic about, or that are that resonate with you on a personal level, that you look at that period of art? Because they're all different in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the thing is that I didn't really come to Marvel Comics until I was already a professional, because they just weren't available where I was growing up. So although I'd heard of things like the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, because Marvel UK, even in the 70s, were doing these little pocketbook reprints, often in black and white. So the first Marvel comic I read was a small black and white reprint of the Wedding of the Fantastic Four. I had no idea what was going on, but Superman wasn't in it, so I didn't buy the next one. And it wasn't really until I was already a professional and the news agents started stocking some of the Marvel stuff, and the first two issues of anything I read were the last two issues of Daredevil Born Again, which coincidentally had Captain America in it. And actually that version of Captain America that appears in the final issue of that, just that silhouette of him commanding the Avengers, that was very, very much at the root of my thinking when I came to do Ultimates, because that was the one that resonated with me. I mean, I love Mazzucchelli's work. The guy was extraordinary, and just did a short body of work, but it still remains, some of the most fundamentally brilliant stuff. And that Daredevil Born Again and the Batman Year One, and it's just stunning, on every level. So, I mean, I've got all of his earlier issues too, and you can see the evolution, and a rapid evolution at that. But yeah, that one image of Captain America. So my reading of things like that was much more retrospective, because, as I say, I was rooted in the DC stuff. And actually, one of the other things I got hold of around that time was given to me by a friend, and it was an Avengers annual drawn by Don Newton, which was originally intended to be the start of I think a run on Avengers, because he came over originally with the intention of doing Captain America himself. So it's a very Captain America centric Avengers two-parter. The first part, or the first issue chapter, was inked by Jack Awell, the second by Joe Rubenstein. But that's all they ended up ever doing for Marvel before going back under contract at DC. And again, because Don Newton was such a potent influence on me growing up, because like you said about the more realistic stuff. So it was the Garcia Lopez, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, Don Newton, especially Jerry Ordway. It was that much more realistic stuff that I latched onto. I enjoyed drawing cartoons, but I in my mind, I wanted my drawings to look like the films I was watching. And I was as influenced by the way films used space and composition, and of course in films there's always backgrounds as well. So I wanted the environments to be as real, and I was aware that usually in comics the backgrounds are often things that get left out, and the establishing shots are the small things. And that's not the way I think. I think place is just as important as people when you're telling stories. Yeah, so those two things, the Captain America in Born Again and that Avengers annual that Don Newton drew, they were my first real appreciations of Captain America, actually, because they're the first experiences I had with him. Oh, and actually one more. I'd forgotten about this, but it's just popped in my head. I mentioned about Marvel UK doing the reprints, and they also did these larger format 2000 AD size, that magazine size. They were doing weekly prints of those in the early 80s. And one of them was some Captain America stuff, but issue 2 had a cover bar, which was a really dynamic figure. I copied it a few times because I really liked it, but it was drawn by Paul Neary, who of course I ended up working with for years. And when we did work together, and I told him about this thing, he said, "Oh yeah, I drew that." I was like, fantastic. Have you still got the original? He said, "No, we sold it a long time ago," because I would have bought it off him in a heartbeat, because it's one of those like little moments where as a kid you look at something and go, I want to be able to do that.
That's cool. And you mentioned wanting to do things like film. So let's talk about Ghost Machine, right? Because this is a media company that that you and several colleagues had launched. But how did that come about? Because there's some really talented folks who are part of this, and we have Brad Meltzer and Jason Fabok and Gary Frank and Jeff Johns, Francis Manipal, Peter J. Tomasi, Ivan Rice, just to name a few. How did Ghost Machine come about?
Well, the center of all of that is Jeff, really, because Jeff knows all of us, or has worked with all of us. Although some of us know each other, Jeff's really the kind of the spider at the center of that particular web. But I suppose it's been evolving for a couple of years, 2.5 years. He did Geiger with Gary, and he and Gary have worked together for the best part of 20 years. And he and Jay, pretty much discovered Jay at DC with his Justice League stuff, and got Jay on Justice League. So the Geiger stuff worked really well for them, and Jeff and I met, what is it now, 9 years ago at a DC conference that was the root of the Rebirth stuff. That's where Jeff and I met for the first time. We were well aware of each other, and we got on really well, and we were determined we were going to work together in some form. Back then it was going to be, we were going to sort of somewhat merge the two Justice. I was doing JLA, he was doing Justice League, and we talked about splitting the team and doing an A and B and doing crossovers and things like that, just ways of keeping the stuff dynamic and having them, sales be strong on both titles rather than them being an A and a B title, if you see what I mean. But then Rebirth happened, and plans changed and switched, but we always talked about working together. We wanted to do a big ground floor retail of Justice Society, though Dan wasn't keen particularly, and a few other things. And one conversation leads to another, and somehow out of nowhere, Redcoat started to develop, though it was different from how it's ended up. And part of that is because when we created him and we spun him out of the Geiger 80-page giant 2 years ago, and we were intending to go straight into a miniseries right then. He was busy with Stargirl, the TV show, and other stuff with Gary, obviously, and Three Jokers with Jay, and I had Venom and Ultimate Invasion and Superman Luthor to do. So just time kept getting pushed back before we could really get into the project properly, though we kept talking about it on and off. And about a year and a bit ago, just over, well, I suppose it was the very beginning of last year, maybe a little before that. Yeah, maybe a year past, 18 months actually. God, time flies. We just started talking about whether there was another way of doing the creator ownership, because it's difficult for some artists, and it's slightly easier for writers who obviously can write more material than artists can draw on average. So you can have your mainstream titles and you can have your creator owned titles, and one can fund the other. But for artists it's difficult. There are some advances available, but not much, and certainly not for all. But you're still reliant on something being a success and the back end of that, and it's still very much a one team show in how you market it, and you liaise with retailers, and you get it into people's hands. And it's, as you know, because of the way Marvel and DC do business, it's a big undertaking. So it just kind of evolved from that, with a lot of, it starts with Gary and Jeff, and then just gradually balloons out into a lot of different conversations with different people, different business heads. By that I mean people who understand business, and business funding and modeling and all of that, to eventually create what became a company rather than just a way of doing creator ownership, because it became really important to all of us, that we remain independent, and don't become, because there were possibilities before, of kind of developing this stuff within the framework of another big media company, like Amazon or Legendary and things like that. But we would have become a department within that and not a wholly independent company, and that really wasn't how we felt like we wanted to do business. So it wasn't a quick thing to put together, even when the initial idea started to become that we wanted to do Ghost Machine. So it's taken a while, but at the heart of all of it is Jeff, because Jeff knew people in all the different areas of the industry, comics, media in general, and here's the glue that pulled everybody together, really. I mean, he's worked, he's known Pete. Pete was one of his earliest editors. He thinks of Pete as a mentor. But Pete's also a terrific writer as well as a long-time editor. And he was already working with Gary, Jay, and me. So Jeff, Gary, Jay, and me are sort of the foundational members. And then it was an easy pick to, Brad was completely up for it. We all know Brad. I've known Brad for years as well. So and we'd all wanted to work together in some way. So the real alchemy for this was that when it ballooned and we got together for the first time, as a group, just prior to the New York Comic-Con, we had a couple of days before New York last year where we got together as a whole company, including all the people the readers never hear about, which are the behind the scenes people like Kat and Mike and Brian and Jamie and Rebecca and especially Corey, who essentially runs our business. They what we didn't expect was, I think we hoped we'd all get on really well and we'd gel as a group. I think what nobody expected was that it would become, it sounds saccharine, but in the most genuine possible sense, it became a real family and a huge team, a very supportive network. I mean, it's just fantastic. None of us have really ever had that. We've all had working partnerships we've enjoyed, and we still have those, but this is something completely different. None of us have experienced, the group, the amount of talent, experience, and just support from every level, and every person in that team's just extraordinary.
No, and thanks for taking us through that. It's always interesting when you see companies like this launch. I mean, there's always comparisons out there, right? So we remember when Valiant launched, and then when Image launched, and it was a bunch of creators in the industry that were well known and very talented and coming together, and both those examples had a lot of success. And so one of the things that I thought was interesting about Ghost Machine was that it was not going to focus on superheroes. And right. I think you were quoted to say, we want to create beyond superheroes, heroes, yes, capes, no.
That's right.
And so I really like that. And there was a lot of different genres out there that different creative teams are working on. So let's talk about yours. Let's talk about Redcoat and how this came about. Now, issue number 1 has come out. And so I'm actually, I apologize. I'm holding the Ivan Rice
I've been
cover,
right one, yeah.
right? So
it's a cool cover.
yeah. It was the only one left in my local comic shop. So they sold out, and I was lucky to get this one. But let's talk about Redcoat and a little bit about the character and a little bit about the plot, so you could share with the fans.
It's as I say, it changed somewhat from the more broad sort of immortal bounty hunter concept that it started with, and the cool element of him being, a British redcoat who's made immortal and lives through this alternative American history. And initially, I was more interested in doing the post-apocalyptic stuff because it was interesting taking the anachronistic stuff of somebody who looks like he belongs 300 years ago using futuristic weapons like Boba Fett. That was the interesting take, which is kind of where we started it on the 80-page giant. But as time passed and we started building towards this this new venture, we changed a lot in how we thought about Simon, and I think that's come out of personal stuff to both Jeff and I in what we've been through in the last couple of years.
And Simon Pure is you're referencing the
Yeah.
character Simon
Yeah,
Pure,
sorry,
just for
yeah,
those who haven't read it yet. Yeah.
Um, and it began initially with this idea of how long it takes somebody to change and learn from their mistakes. And that began because I actually said to Jeff, I've learned from my mistakes and can repeat them almost exactly. And that line stuck. And because there's this thing in superhero comics, isn't there? You get great powers, therefore must have great responsibility, or you then must fight crime or save the world from evil, and that's really not what most people would do. I'm not a heroic person. I like to think that I stand in front of a roaring tiger to save my kids, probably because I couldn't run faster than them anyway. But that's not this kind of generosity of spirit, that selflessness of a character like Superman, who's, I mean, in many ways, Simon is the opposite of Superman. Superman's, everybody's best friend and wants to inspire and give hope and all of that stuff, and will work his arse off to save anybody, including cats stuck in a tree. Simon would shoot the cat, possibly eat it as well if it was hungry. It's a different kind of look at how somebody ends up learning to be a decent human being. I mean, it's set against the backdrop of world-ending magical historical affairs, but at the end of the day, it's Simon's personal therapy over several centuries of learning what it takes to actually care about one person, possibly, somebody other than himself. He lives day to day, eats, sleeps, moves around. He hasn't got a home. He's never had a home. Nobody's ever cared about him, and he's never cared about anybody. So it's an interesting thing when you make somebody immortal, who genuinely is afraid to die, but has no idea how to live. He exists, but that's not living. It's just existing. He's moving from one place to another. So he's going to get caught up in all of this stuff, which is going to ultimately force him to question. It's not going to be, an upward curve towards heroism, because there's going to be peaks and troughs where, think of Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. He wakes up every morning. He remembers everything. Nobody else does. But it starts off being something he doesn't, understand. It's denial. Then it's like, I can do anything with this. And then it's boredom and repetition. Then it's so depressing that he starts to kill himself repeatedly. And it's only at the very end of what could have been for him, I don't know, a century's worth of days. You don't know how long but it's clearly been a very long time, that he begins to realize he's got an opportunity to better himself, both as a person and in learning how to do things, which is kind of, if I was potentially immortal, like to think I'd learn to do things. So yeah, so what I was saying was that Simon is going to learn. I think there's an inevitability to that, one way or another. But it is going to take him centuries, because, as we know, he's still alive in the Geiger period, which is 25 years from our time. And he was made immortal in 1776. So that's a fairly lengthy learning curve. Now, in the first issue, he meets this young kid, and the adventures he goes on. We're going to cut back and forth to his adventures with this kid, because the life, this kid's life, is going to be very impactful on Simon in the long term. And you'll see as the first arc plays out how that works. But Jeff and I were talking about, initially I think it was also going to just be a series of mini-series, and then we just got so into how we can deal with Simon, and the stories we can tell about the human condition set against all of this extraordinary stuff, which Jeff describes as the Gilded Age meets Pirates of the Caribbean.
I think it's really interesting when you put it in the respect of Groundhog Day, right? So it's Groundhog Day meets a jerk British soldier from the Revolutionary War, and it is a fascinating concept. And so Jeff Johns is a brilliant writer, so he's gonna do no wrong on this, but the art is absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
It is I can't think, I mean, I look back on a lot of the art that you've done over the years, I don't see anything that's been better than this. This may be you at the top of your game here. So talk a little bit about this is you and Jeff's creation. So talk a little bit about how your involvement with does he give a plot? Do you take a look, and you come up and you share some ideas, and then he gives you free reign to work on the art? Like, how does it work on this particular series?
It's I mean, it's in many ways, on the surface, traditional. He writes a script and I draw the book, but that belies the constant, many times during the day, communications we have, from phone calls to the Signal messaging app we use, and emails, and it's constant contact. And he's uniquely collaborative. In fact, he welcomes notes and questions. So we discuss Simon's character and plot ideas and story ideas constantly, and then scripts come in, and Jeff's position is I'm the director, so I do what I need to with that back and forth. If there needs to be script additions or changes or modifications, we discuss those. But Jeff's very good at his job, so he gives me what I need. But also there's still input into dialogue, because it's a very collaborative process, and that's an open process. We all have that, and Jeff's open to notes from all of us, because we all look at each other's materials. It's none of us are a closed shop to any thoughts, because somebody might have a good idea, honestly, and it's a uniquely supportive and collaborative group in general. But Brad Anderson on colors and Rob Lee on letters, they're just as important to the team as I am. Brad's colors are frankly astonishingly good. It makes me look an awful lot better. So working with Brad is a joy. Working with Jeff is a joy. We were talking, that what I was going to say before was that we were talking about Simon's character, and realizing that it's probably going to take us 60 to 100 issues to do the story the way we want to do it. This is Walking Dead length kind of storytelling, because just literally the month after I started drawing it, I said to him, let's just make it monthly. Let's just do it. I can do a monthly, so let's be there every single month. And so Geiger's a monthly, Redcoat's a monthly, and there'll be other monthlies to come along. But I just think it's important also to have a really good spine to the Ghost Machine stuff, and that constant presence on the shelves. And I think the story will I think if people start reading it, I think it will hook and keep people hooked, because there's, apart from all the fun adventurous stuff in there, I think there's a really good human story in there too, because that's why you write the stories. You're not writing about people and what they're going through. You're doing something wrong.
Right. Yeah. And so this is going to be a monthly book. I think I read somewhere that the creators that are involved with Ghost Machine, this is it like exclusivity? Like they're strictly working on Ghost Machine?
Well, we own the company, so it would seem silly to work for somebody else's, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, Ghost Machine is creator owned and creator operated. So the creators are up front, brilliantly supported by, the behind the scenes crew. But this is where we want to be. These are the characters we want to work on. Jay's Rook series is a lifelong dream for him, and he can see himself doing that for the rest of his career. I could see, Ghost Machine is, as far as I'm concerned, the rest of my career. It's a company I co-own, and I'm going to get to do books I want to do. Redcoat is going to be the spine of it for me, but there are other things that'll spin out of Redcoat I'll be doing, as well as and some other stuff on the sides too. So I calculated that if I did 16 issues a year, it would take me at least 10 years to do what I've already got planned.
Oh,
and
wow.
that's without coming up with anything new. So I'm not going anywhere, and none of the rest of us are. If we are, it'll be into retirement.
Okay. Well, we do have a few questions from our patrons that we'd like to
Sure.
kind of sprinkle in as we go along. And I think this one's pretty appropriate. Mark Domeyer asks, just curious with how specific and detailed your artwork is. What is the average time it takes you to complete a 22-page comic monthly on the shelves? Thanks. Keep up the great work.
Yeah, that's one of those things with, like, how long's a piece of string? Because each issue might well be 22 pages, but what's on each page can vary project to project. Team books take longer for obvious reasons, because you're dealing with more characters per page, especially with the way I like to keep people in shot and move the camera around and the environment. So those books do take longer. But from things like Hawkman, Batman's Grave, and onwards, really, I've been doing anywhere from 12 to 18 issues a year. So you can work that out, into your weeks and your days. On some days I could do anywhere up to 4 pages a day, depending, because on things like Venom, for instance, it was always fairly hectic, because stuff came in late script wise. It was a little chaotic on the scheduling front. There were times when it was extra sized, and times when things double shipped that I wasn't aware of. I thought I was well ahead at one point, and they said, actually, no, you're a month behind. I said, how can I be? I was literally 2 weeks ahead. And they said, oh, we double shipped those 2 issues. Nobody tells me that stuff. And then I was on what became my last issue, which was 16. I'd drawn issue 15, and I was a couple of pages into issue 16, believing I had another 3 weeks to finish issue 16. And they said, oh, no, we're double shipping those 2 as well.
Oh, boy.
So I ended up penciling and inking something like 13 pages over a 3-day weekend to finish that one off. So that was a little backbreaking. So for a long time now, it's been as many pages a day as I need to do in order to make sure the books are on time, because I won't be late. Redcoat is slightly different, because I think I'm more impassioned about Redcoat. There's a little more research involved. It's not quite as easy to draw horses and carriages as it is to draw a car, for instance. That stuff takes a bit of time. It's getting easier because I'm getting more familiar with it. Things like I don't have to look up reference for clothing quite so much, because I'm very familiar with the 1890s we're currently working in. Environments, that kind of thing, they take a little longer, because again, it's not so easy to find go out the door and find the reference you need, or use the thousands of photos I've taken on various trips to New York. So but again, it's getting quicker and getting easier because I'm becoming more familiar with stuff. And then no doubt what will happen is we'll change time period again, and then I'll have to start all over again. So Redcoat, I'm trying to do on average a page a day. I want to get a bit quicker because I want to get the schedule quite a bit further ahead, for a number of reasons, but not least of which is because there are other projects I want to do next year. So I want to make sure that we stay, because I'm not going to let anybody draw the monthly Redcoat comic. I'm quite happy to bring some people in to draw specials, annuals and whatnot if needed, but nobody else is touching this book. So to answer the question briefly, then, on average right now, about a page a day of Redcoat. Some are a little quicker, some are a little longer, but it's an average. But I'm trying to get the pencils to around 3 working weeks. That would be my ideal.
So you mentioned team books take a little bit longer. So let's talk about The Ultimates, a series you developed with Mark Miller back in 2002. One of our patrons, Matthew Glover, asks, with the Ultimates universe being open-ended and not having any long-term continuity to address, how freeing was it working on these characters in the Ultimate universe as opposed to the main 616 universe?
Well, when Joe Quesada first brought me over, I mean, Mark had taken on the authority after Warren and I had left, and I knew Mark had done the Ultimate X-Men. So when Joe Quesada called and said, literally, the lunatics are running the asylum over here, do you want to come and join the party? That was his opening line. What became Ultimate Avengers initially, Joe was very clear, do what you like. He said, this is not the other universe. If you want to kill Steve Rogers, kill Steve Rogers. If you want to kill any of these characters, you can do that. You can literally do whatever you like. And that held true all the way through the book. They just basically let us do what we wanted. So Ralph Macchio, who is the editor, was a very helpful guiding voice, as Ralph often is when he'd had his shoes shined and read the newspaper. So by lunchtime he was ready to go. But Ralph would call and just spin me great stories from the history of comics, because he worked in comics when Jack Kirby was at Marvel, as a young guy, and he had some brilliant stories and anecdotes, and they were always fun to read. But genuinely, Mark and I were just given absolutely free rein to do what we like, because actually what they wanted was an all ages Avengers book that anybody could read. Bill Jemis's idea for that was much more, at least tonally, something like the Bruce Timm cartoons. But at the same time, they wanted us because of what we'd both done on Authority at our different periods. And when Mark and I first started talking about the Ultimates, it was going to be all those things. It was going to be big fantastical adventures in Kang and Asgard and all of this sort of stuff. And I'm sure this has been well documented, but then as we're building up towards it, and I was designing characters over a summer off. I'd finished up some other stuff, and I'd done a load of what people may not realize. When the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie came out, they had to do all the licensing artwork because there was nothing from the film they could use, because the effects hadn't been done at the point they needed to release all this stuff to licensing companies for lunchboxes, t-shirts, tablecloths, whatever. So I did a load of drawings for that, which were then digitally painted over to look roughly like the movie costume. And it was, really well paid. So I took the whole summer off to think about, mostly I watched tennis, if I'm honest, and drank wine. But I also started thinking about the build up to starting the Ultimates in the autumn. And then by that point, it was really very much a big fantasy adventure thing, much more like the Authority in terms of the types of stories we were going to tell, the big budget stuff. And then 9/11 happened before we started it, and it just changed the tone, because pop culture inevitably responds to what's going on in the world around you. It always does, because pop culture is not timeless, not the way people think of it as. Good pop culture really, the stories may be timeless, but everything always references periods. Stan Lee's use of radiation to create superpowers was very much a 1960s thing because of, you know, all the atomic stuff going on, the Cold War and things like that. So 9/11 happened, and we're seeing this appalling horror, terror, and destruction in the real world. And there was a phrase on the news which was super terrorism, and we just said that's what it would be like if the Avengers lived in the real world. This is what it would be like. This is what you'd see and what it would feel like. And so it became a lot more grounded in concept. And the way we dealt with the fantastical stuff had always to be from a grounded point of view. And I stopped thinking about superhero costumes and started thinking about, I looked at military wear, and I looked at extreme sporting gear. That was the other thing. And stopped thinking about spandex. I started thinking about practical clothing and stopped thinking about spray painted muscles, which is what superheroes always traditionally were. And then again, about the time 9/11 was happening, I stopped thinking about Captain America as a superhero and remember that he's a super soldier. And I think, what if that's literal? Why don't we make it that and make Cap a soldier? You know, he's a genuine soldier. Treat him like a soldier. He fought in World War II. At his heart, that's still who he is. He's a soldier. He's not a superhero. He might do heroic things, but he is a soldier. He's fighting for an America he believes in. That gives you a completely different perspective on how to start, you know, making the character operate physically and visually. And I did this sketch I sent to Mark, which was just, I mean, it wasn't what we ended up going with, but it was Steve in a sort of fairly classic Captain America suit, but he was wearing a flak jacket and holding some guns. We ended up going without the guns because we just felt it wasn't quite Steve to use guns, even though he did in some of the early comics. Kirby did. But that change of thinking from 9/11, and again the thing with Nick Fury, Colin Powell was the highest ranking military man in America at the time, and Mark's comment was passing comment was literally, that's who Nick Fury would be. He'd be Colin Powell. And Mark had suggested Morgan Freeman kind of to play him in a movie, and I said, no, it's going to be Sam Jackson. I've just watched Shaft, and I just thought that's Nick Fury. So I did a drawing of Sam Jackson as Nick Fury. It just stuck, and we just ended up going that way. And Mark was, you've got to use that likeness because he loves comics. And you know, he got a 59 picture deal out of it, so he's done okay.
Yeah, did Samuel Jackson ever thank you for that, by the way?
Yes, I've met him a couple of times now. And he owns some of the artwork too.
You know, there's certain I think story arcs, like Spider-Man One More Day, very controversial, right? You either love it or you hate it. And I got to tell you, for a lot of Cap fans, the Ultimate series sort of falls into that category. So, you know, Rick and I, you know, we are active on a Captain America comic book fans Facebook group, and lots of posts every day, lots of Cap fans, but you will rarely see a post about the Ultimate Cap, because he tends to be a very controversial character for a lot of the reasons you just discussed, right? Very different than what we see in the 616 universe. And yet, the Ultimate's Cap really informed a lot of what we see in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And there's a lot of praise for that. Cap fans generally love that. So, like, that paradox is out there where, like, very uncomfortable with the Ultimate's Cap and even the Ultimate's Avengers, but it stands out on its own as, like, this series that is has made a mark. Like, what do you think of that paradox where it is name recognition for the Ultimates, but yet a lot of fans are uncomfortable with it? And it seems to me that's a good mark to make when you're trying to do something different, that's bold and creative and takes comics in a way that's different than what we're used to.
Well, I can definitely see both in comics and obviously say in the film stuff, a line in the sand where there's a before Ultimates and an after Ultimates. But I think what's happened is that I think the reason people don't really discuss, as you say, the Ultimate stuff is because actually what we did in the Ultimates, both in story and visually, has been essentially filtered back through the other media. Yes, the film's the obvious one visually, that they lifted very, I mean, Ryan Meenerding, who was leading all the design work at Marvel, has been very open about the fact that it was the Ultimates was the go-to thing. The directors all read the Ultimates, the writers all read the Ultimates. It's Kevin's Bible. It was the proof of concept. Kevin told me as much. It was the proof of concept for how to treat the characters in film, which is great. But there was also, you can see at the time, our Captain America, at least in parts, a great deal visually, how I treated him visually, not just in the costuming, but physically, that filtered back into the 616 Cap anyway. So I think there are elements of the Ultimate Cap still out there, but I think what's happened is that the bits people don't like have been gradually filtered out. So what you're left with is, Chris Evans' terrific portrayal, and those movies he did, which I just think were fantastic, and also he's clearly influenced the mainstream Marvel comics of Captain America since. So that often happens with anything that is influential anyway. So as I say, pop culture's of its time. The Ultimates was of its time. If we did the Ultimates today, it would not be the same as that. If we had to create a book like the Ultimates now, it would not be the same. Mark and I aren't the same. The world isn't the same. It's a different world. I mean, we started that 20 something years ago, so 23 years ago, 22 years ago. So that's almost half my life back. And I say that was a very different world we were living in at the time. But so what always happens with something that's influential, I suppose, is that it bleeds back into the surrounding areas. The wave washes up on the shore, and that's fine. I think the work stands fine. I'm still proud of it visually. I think I think there's, if I had to do a director's cut, it will probably be shorter rather than longer, because I think it's a bit woolly in places. But I'm still pleased by what we achieved on it. And I can see the influences, but I'm not too concerned. And I actually share some of the criticism. I agree with a lot of it. I think it was at times an ugly portrayal of those characters. And yes, you can see the Tony Stark in the films, in our Tony Stark in the Ultimates, quite easily. I think not just physically and visually, but they were not nice people. They were not nice characters. And I think what they've rightly done in the films is try and find the appealing side of those characters, which is something we didn't do. I think we were deliberately moving into a somewhat I don't know, anti-hero is the wrong thing, but it's the punk rock comics, if you want to call it something that's a bit anti-establishment, mostly because we weren't given any brief to be establishment. In fact, we were kind of encouraged to go away from, because they had that other stuff. They had the other Avengers books. They had another Captain America book. So why do it the same way anyway?
So let's talk about your work with Ed Brubaker on Captain America Reborn.
Mm-hmm.
One of our patrons, Joshua Van Dyne, asks, how did you feel illustrating one of the most important story in Captain America's history? And Josh has a good point, right? Cap was apparently killed in, Captain America 25, and 3 years have passed in real time. And then Bucky becomes the new Cap. What was it like being involved in a story that was finally bringing back Steve Rogers, and what drew you to the story?
Well, I knew when they'd done the Death of Captain America story, I said to Joe Quesada, I said, if you ever do the Captain America Reborn, or whatever you're going to call it, the Return of Captain America, said, if you give it to anybody else, I will murder you. So I'd asked for that. And so Joe, true to his word, came and said, do you want to do the book? So I was delighted to do it, because I actually loved drawing Cap. It was by far my favorite Ultimate character to draw. And I could have done I almost did an Ultimate Captain America series, actually, after the Ultimates. So I was delighted to do it. Ed's work on the book was legendary, so that was nice. It was well written. I got a lot of interesting stuff to draw, and I love Butch Guice's work, and he ended up inking it. So I was sandwiched between a couple of decent chaps there, and it was a pleasure to do it. I was probably much more of an art robot on that book, though I did keep expanding it in page counts because I wanted to blow the visuals up a little bit more, which used to drive Marvel potty, but they let me do it anyway.
Well, in fact, it was supposed to be a 5-issue miniseries, and then Tom Brevoort said, we got to expand this to 6 issues because it just felt like it was too.
That was the story though, not the art that was forcing the expansion. They'd stuck an extra issue on because Ed couldn't get to the end in the 5 issues, which is fine. It was great, but it did sort of cause a bit of a time crunch. But fortunately, Butch is really quick, and he was able to work from somewhat looser pencils than I would normally work from. They weren't layouts or breakdowns exactly, but I didn't have to worry about putting a line down that had to be inked exactly. So it worked out quite well in that respect. An interesting thing from that though is I just drawn literally the first 2 pages, which is the World War II opening where they do the like Normandy landing, and there's that splash of Cap standing on the beach and I just instinctively did sort of a helmet rather than just the original Cap uniform, which I should have done, I suppose. I should have done it, the way it should have looked, but I didn't even think about it. I just did something that felt World War II, and instead of making the wings physical wings, I just painted them on stencils because that's what World War II would have looked like. Anyway, Ed calls me up the next day, said I'm actually in California. We've got this round table meeting. They've been trying to nail Captain America's helmet for months, and they couldn't figure out how to make the wings work. You've just solved their entire helmet issue. I was like, wait, do I get extra money for that?
Yeah.
I didn't.
In the Reborn series, Steve is trapped and he's forced to relive many of his greatest battles over and over. And I was fortunate enough to recently pick up 2 beautiful splash pages from your collection. One where Cap is partnering with Rick Jones as Bucky, going up against Viper and the hordes of Hydra. And another one where he's battling an army of Skrulls in space. Did you spend a lot of time researching those older stories? Because I'm seeing a strong homage to a double-page splash in Captain America 110 by Jim Steranko back in 1969.
Oh yeah, I looked at all that stuff because, as I said, it wasn't like the Ultimates where the history was ours to create and build. This was something that was building off something that already existed. So whilst I wanted to make it feel as fresh and modern as I could, it had to be built on material that was already there. So yes, I did research it as best I could anyway. And with Marvel's help, they sent me a lot of material that I asked for because I wanted to know what I was starting with. So yeah, I know the one you mean, the Jim Steranko. Yeah, that was definitely referencing that material because it was that event. So Jim had originally drawn it. So why wouldn't you look at, the way Jim had done it?
Yeah, it's a beautiful homage. And by the way, I was really surprised that you still have so many pages to Reborn and even the Ultimates in your personal collection that you're finally putting up for sale. Why now after all these years? And are there some pieces you prefer to still hold on to?
It's a series of events, really. There was a chap who'd been handling some art sales for me from when I was on the Authority, and he stopped doing that. And he still had a whole load of material from a website he'd set up, so he had tons of pages. I didn't know quite what. And we'd been talking about him sending that back to me because I'd started selling again through Comic Art Fans, Bill Cox's site. I'd had a gallery up there, and I'd been putting pages and covers up there from more recent stuff. And we finally got all the stuff back from him. We just finally managed to arrange a way of getting the stuff back, which didn't involve going through British customs. And so I didn't know what was in there. So it was quite a nice surprise to all of us to find there was some Ultimates pages and all that Captain America Reborn stuff. I didn't even know we had all that still. So it was a nice surprise to me as well.
Captain America Reborn, even parts of the Ultimates, the covers for Man Out of Time, the Mark Waid series. So much historical background material must have to be gone through for you to prep for that. And I'm just wondering what your research is like. We've talked to other artists. We talked to Paulo Rivera, and he talked a bit about his research methodology to prepare to illustrate those panels and trying to make them historically accurate.
Mhm.
And there's so much. Your backgrounds are dense. The equipment is accurate, at least appears to me. I'm a military guy, and it looks realistic to me. Like, what do you have to do to get ready for that sort of assignment?
Well, I suppose it's like a distillation of the same process that goes into films. It's you know what the story is going to be, so you start researching how to build it or where you find the environment. There's sometimes you can't shoot in New York in 1945, so you shoot in Glasgow. So those tricks still work too. So it might look like it's some of that stuff's early New York or Boston, as in Redcoat issue 1, but actually it's not all of it. It's just enough of it actually to be historically accurate, but the rest of it you build out using what resources you can. But I don't see that stuff as additional work really, because I want the stuff to live accurately. I want it to be the way I see it in my head. So I get a real kick out of drawing all the military stuff, like the opening of Ultimates with Captain America, and that's a joy to do, because when you get it right, it starts to feel real and it exists. It isn't just a cartoon of something that's approximately militaristic. It does take time. Back in those days, in the Ultimates days, it was just a lot of books and going to the library and buying that stuff. Now it's an awful lot easier to find, because despite not just what's on Google, but things like historical, museums put their resources are available online too. So you can always find information on pretty much anything you want to find information on. I suppose the trick is to get enough of it and be familiar enough with it so you're not a slave to the reference, but the reference helps inform the drawing more than the other way around. But I actually get a great deal of pleasure out of it. I love history anyway. I didn't in school, but there were because it was just about kings and queens and dates and seed drills and that kind of thing, and media changed that when they started talking about what it was, instead of what happened in history, but what is it like to live at these times. And that gets my imagination going, and I love that stuff. I love to think about history in that way visually, and what would it have been like to exist in that time. And that comes in when I'm drawing historical stuff, because I just want it to be an immersive experience for both the character and for the readers.
Well, listen, you are definitely nailing that with the Redcoat series, right? I'm looking at this right now, and you said, it doesn't feel like work to you because you love doing the research, but it has to be, you must have put so much into this, looking at the time periods. I know you mentioned like the carriages and the horses and things like that as well. So in this first issue, we're looking at 1776. 1779, 1820, 1892, talking about your love of history. I can imagine, like, and you said you've got this planned out for quite some time. Like, what other time periods, are we looking at? Or the early 1900s to, or is there, you could have so much fun, go to Woodstock, like whatever.
The one thing we won't do, I think, is present day, and I think that's because so many other mainstream comics they're all present day, and I think once you put Simon in today, it becomes a little less interesting for me. There might be an odd scene today because his story hops around a little bit, like the end of the first story arc actually ends in the 1950s, for instance, but we might do 1970s New York because that's an interesting visual as well, because that's what I want it to be. I want it to be something that feels like it is a period. Even 1980s feels like a period now, even though I grew up then. Mm-hmm. But no, my kids assure me it is a period. So I think there's a lot of fun to be had. Although we know Simon does exist in Geiger's time, when he interacts in that time, I think it's going to be in Geiger with Gary doing those scenes, because our story is how he gets there and what happens after. But we have a couple of 100 years worth of stories to tell, though I'm going to try and do it a little bit quicker than that.
Well, listen, to the Captain America fans that are listening and watching right now, what do you say to them and people who have been a fan of your work over the years? What do you say to them to try to give Redcoat a try?
Yeah, well, they're not very similar in as much as one's a true heroic patriot and the other is just trying to not eat squirrels to survive. But I think if you like the work that I did on Captain America, the authenticity that I brought to Cap and his time periods and the way those affected him as a man out of time, I think you'll probably find the same authenticity in Simon's journey in Redcoat.
Excellent. Well, I got to tell you, I love the first issue. I highly
Thank
recommend the series. I can't wait to pick up the next one. And that's saying a lot considering I don't go out too far from my little universe of comics. So kudos to you and Jeff on the series.
Thank you.
What is the best way for fans to follow you?
All the Ghost Machine chaps are on Instagram, and there's the Ghost Machine. The Ghost Machine as a company's on Instagram too, and all there is individuals, and we post there all the time, post art, join each other in conversations. So that's probably the best way to find us in socials. The ghostmachinepro.com is our website, and all the links you'll find for our social media stuff is there. I'm still trawling around the bottoms of X every now and again, but mostly it's Instagram because that's where all the cool stuff goes.
Got it. Well, we'll also share a link in the show notes for anybody to check that out.
Right.
Bryan, listen, thank you so much for joining the show. We really had a great time talking with you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. It's been great.
That was really fun having Bryan on the show. What a true gentleman. Really enjoyed listening to him, and I wish I had these at the time to show him, but these are the double page.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. These are the double page splashes that I had from Captain America Reborn.
Amazing.
Yeah, that one, and then also him fighting the Skrulls.
Yeah, beautiful.
I mean, just look at the detail on that.
Yes,
I mean,
the detail's amazing.
He is so
master. Yeah,
so talented.
Indeed.
And I can't wait for I read Redcoat #1, and I can't wait to pick up the next issue to see where this this ne'er-do-well where it takes him next.
Yeah.
So looking
yeah,
forward to that.
I wasn't familiar with Redcoat, but having participated in this conversation, I'm really interested because I'm a history guy. I love history, and I love historical contexts for comic stories. I think it's a great opportunity to be entertained, but also educated. And the amount of research that he's done to address different time periods really appeals to me. So I'm looking forward to diving into to that series.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a good read. I highly recommend it to anyone to pick it up. All right, Bob, next episode, we're going to get back to our panel by panel review of Streets of Poison, which was the 7-part series that came out in 1990. We have done parts 1 through 4, and now we're going to get into part 5, and it's getting a little crazy. Cap is no longer just showing signs of being on under the influence of drugs. Now he's just bad out crazy.
Yeah. And dare I say, it's also getting a little crowded because new characters are being introduced into this particular story arc. So it's getting really interesting.
Yeah, it's gonna this upcoming story. This one has Daredevil versus Crossbones. Crossbones versus Kingpin, and Captain America versus Diamondback and Black Widow.
Yep.
And then somebody shows up at the very end as well. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good story. Fun, yeah. It's been fun covering this one by Mark Grunwald and Ron Lim.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it. That's for sure.
Excellent. All right, Bob. Well, as always, it's been fun wrapping Cap with you.
It has. I can't wait till next week, Rick.
All right. He's Bob Lucius. I'm Rick Verbanis. And you, please make sure you rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to this show. If you're on Facebook, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Leave a comment. And if you're on any of the podcasts, leave us a 5-star review. We always enjoy hearing comments from our listeners. And until next time, you've been listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.